Buenos días, queridas hermanas. Buenos días, buenas tardes.
Good morning, dear sisters. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for some of you. You're all welcome to the next gathering for the virtual seminar, Indigenous Women Weaving Paths Towards the COP28. FEME has prepared this virtual space with the purpose of sharing and exchanging knowledge to build a common position towards COP28. The workshop has been organized with two gatherings, two meetings. The first one was last week on the 23rd, and today we are having our second gathering. We are really thankful to all of those who participated last week and those who are back with us today. And those who couldn't join today, we will be sharing, nevertheless, the recordings and key messages that come up. For those who were not here last week and are here today, I just would like to tell you that last week we were able to hear from experts who are following for a long time now the negotiations that have been developing throughout the annual conferences on climate change. This conference is a space that gathers world leaders, negotiators, who are talking to come to agreements as to how to face climate change. We have the pleasure to have Edna Captoyo, who is the Executive Secretary of the International Organization Alliance of Indigenous and Tribal Peoples of the Tropical Forest. She's from Kenya. We also had the participation of Mr. Sam Still, Executive Secretary of the Framework Convention on Climate Change. From the two of them, we received an overview, quite detailed, I would say, in terms of what is the Conference of the Parties on Climate Change, what is the negotiation process, what's at play, and what's the Indigenous women's role in these negotiations and these negotiation process. And we also talked about some strategies so that we can advocate effectively in this space. For today, we hope that together we can build from what we heard last week and what we're going to hear today. We can then together prepare a declaration, a statement with key messages addressed to the negotiators, to that space, with what we think, what we consider should be present in the negotiations on climate change. I should also say that we have interpretation. If you click on the globe icon, you can select the language that you prefer to listen in. And you can also share in the messages your comments, your concerns, questions, and the team, the technical team from FEME will be answering as much as we can. And for those who perhaps prefer to leave their messages there, please, you're welcome to do that.
La cosmovisión de los pueblos indígenas.
As you know, from the Indigenous people's cosmovision, all cycle that we start, we accompany always with a space for spiritual harmony. So we're going to do that too, and we're going to start with one of the main principles for our people. So we're going to give the floor now to Lisa Natividad to help us with this introduction, this beginning. Go ahead.
And half a day, everyone. I come from the Pacific. My people are the Chamorro people in the Micronesian region of the Pacific. And so as we begin, I'd just like to burn some sacred palm, which we use to sanctify our space. And I put it here on our Laddystone representation, which is the sacred symbol of our people, in terms of our strength, as a symbol of the strength of our people, because these were the pillars in which we erected our homes in our ancient times. And so what I want to share today as we open up this space is the creation story of the Chamorro people. And so this creation story talks about how in the beginning, within the mind of the Most High, of the Almighty, all things were one, infinite and limitless. In the beginning, there was darkness before the creation of the earth and the celestial bodies in the sky. There lived a man named Ponten. After a long period of time had passed, Ponten felt ill, so he called on his sister Fortna, who like himself had been born without a mother or father. Ponten gave instructions to the disposal of his body, and Fortna, his sister, with her supernatural powers, took the body parts of Ponten and created the world. With his eyebrows, the rainbows, and the rest of his body, the mountains and valleys, and his urine to make the rivers and the sea. After Fortna created the world, she felt lonely and decided to create people. So in order for her to do this, she gave herself to the sea, and from that moment appeared the first people, the indigenous people of all of humanity. So this is the Chamorro people's story of the creation of humanity. We entrusted our feminine ancestor, our grandmother Fortna, with the creation of the world. And so as we chant today, we bring into our collective consciousness all our grandmothers who have nurtured us, who taught us the art of planting life, sprouting forth from Mother Earth, who have taught us how to be peacemakers, to be the bearers of the light for our communities, and to share love for all of humanity. And so now I open this space with the sacred chant. Manotigit gisanhilo iman amkut na totlang siha. Da intina iman matau, iman mofana na tautau, liman motu giman finena na nasakman siha. Intina iman yanan mami, da intina iman amkut na totlang siha. Gitini tuhun, itini tuhun. Gehalum hinasun iza hululu. Gitini tuhun, itini tuhun. Gehalum hinasun iza hululu. Mane no ihina fasiha tahine ku zantati yehalo Inaso nizahu lolo Yehalo Inaso Yehalo Inaso Izahu lolo Tahine cook dan taiti ha sidus masi. And so with this sacred chant, we've called on our mother spirit, our mother of Fortna, to come into this space and to bless this space of unity with our sisters as we wrestle a very important social issue that we all share across the globe of climate change. Sidus masi. Thank you very much. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for sharing your people's cosmovision on the creation of life. Sharing is a way of maintaining alive our cultures, our cosmovisions, our thoughts as peoples. As I said at the beginning, we're now in this space to start building a document with our position, common position, with key messages that we want to have present in the COP space. So for this, my colleague Rabiatu is going to moderate this next work, this next section.
Thank you, Nadia. Thank you. Can you hear me well? Okay. So thank you everyone for coming. Like what Nadia said, we are happy to have you on this platform today. And we are happy with the discussions that happened last time. And we really hope that each and everyone, we are going back with something very important that we have learned from all of these discussions that are all geared towards building a common future, sustainable future for us, the indigenous people. So we are going to talk about messages that we want to position at the upcoming COP. And we know as FIMI, we are trying to build, to bring our partners, to bring their voices and their priorities. And so this session is going to, we are all going to brainstorm. It's going to be an open discussion session where everyone would bring to the table what you think will be nice to for us as FIMI and all our partners to position during COP on the table of the dialogue of COP. So I will share with you some few, like 3 guiding questions, and maybe we will take off, like we can give 5 minutes, and then each person is going to just reflect on these 3 questions, and then come back what do you think or your reflections about this, and then we can go ahead from that to continue the discussion. So as we know, COP is a vast negotiation area, and we have a lot of thematic discussions, and we have a lot of cross-cutting themes that will be happening during the COP. So we as Indigenous sisters, that we want our voices heard on this. So we want the first question is what are the issues or challenges we face as Indigenous sisters in relation to climate change and environmental protection that we want the world to hear. So that is the first question. We should identify what are the key issues, the challenges, and the priorities when it comes to climate change and environmental protection that we want the world to hear and that we want to portray during COP. So each participant can identify, let me just say 2 key issues, not to make it too long, and then we will come back for the plenary to discuss. And then the second question would be, what are the different priority areas you think we can target in COP? We will have different cross-cutting teams talking about finance, resource allocation, for example. We will have spaces where they will discuss issues like technology and innovation. We will have spaces talking about inclusion and meaningful participation, under which we will discuss gender issues and indigenous issues. So what are those unique priorities or key priorities that you want us to focus on, to focus our voices on when we are in COP? So, and then thirdly, the third question is, when we have identified our challenges and our priorities, what kind of policy changes do we as Indigenous people collectively want to see, want to advocate for in this space of COP? So those are like the 3 guiding questions I want to share with you. And then we can take 5 minutes and each person can try to do an internal brainstorming, and then we come back and we have a discussion around that. So I don't know if I am clear, or if you need any further clarification, we can just let me know. And the interpreters, I don't know if my connection is good and it was not breaking.
Perhaps we could have the questions in the chat so that they can
Yes.
have them in front of them.
Okay.
So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to do that in Spanish as well.
Let me just share.
So Robbie is going to put the questions in English and we will have them in Spanish as well in the chat so that everyone can see them. You can also put your comments in the chat. But you can also take the floor and speak when you want to make comments. When you make comments or when you're going to speak, we ask that you please give us the name of your people and your organization, please. Good morning. Good morning, Elvira. How are you? Welcome. Thank you, Nadia. I'm sorry that I came in late. Right now, we are considering some questions. You'll see them in the chat. And that is to start building a document with our position, which will include key messages that we are going to have at the COP conference. And we presented the questions, and now we're giving a few minutes for people to reflect, and then we'll open the floor to exchange ideas, reflections, comments, shared messages. Elvira, I don't know if you were speaking, your mic was off. Yes, I was saying that this is great because I think it's going to help us get started And then during the presentation, we can clarify some ideas and to work on the declaration. So yes, we're going to do something like that.
So hello everyone. Our 5 minutes are up. I hope maybe we can begin the discussion. So I don't know if we would request people to honor up to share their experiences, or maybe we can go by name, I guess. So maybe I will call on, let me see, on Nadia to share with us. What are the challenges, the issues?
Robbie, we have Elvira here, and since this is a space for collective building, what do you think if, because Elvira has something to share that can complement the reflections by the participants. So what do you think if we give Elvira the floor now, and then we come back with her again towards the end to share all of the reflections? What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's great. So
That's a great idea. Thank you.
Yeah, so that we can the discussion.
So we give her a few minutes then,
Yeah.
Mark.
Elvira, are you there? Yes. Hello, Nadia and sisters. Greetings to all of you. I'd like to begin this conversation by making some reflections on what you've already been talking about. What is the COP? What are some of the topics covered in the Conference of Parties? And what are the most important topics for us as women and as Indigenous organizations who have an important space there? So I'm going to share my screen. Let me know if you can see it. Can you see this? See the screen? Yes, we can see it. Okay, well, I will take off my camera now so that you can see me. And the idea of this conversation is so that you can see which issues are going to be dealt with at the COP. But I'd like to make some preliminary reflections because often when we talk about climate change, there's a whole discourse and there's a lot of people talking about the subject. Those who are wanting to talk just about exclusively technical aspects of it, as if it were just a matter of adaptation and mitigation. But I'd like to start here so we can get a little bit of clarity when we say, what are we talking about when we talk about climate change? First of all, the changes in climate is something that has happened alongside the evolution of human beings on this earth. There is natural change that occurs. However, when we talk about climate change, we're talking exclusively about changes provoked by the actions of human beings. We're not talking about natural variations now. We're talking about changes that has to do with our way that we have developed and begun production and started to live in this earth on the last decades. One of the most important causes for the beginning of climate change was the Industrial Revolution. As you know, Industrial Revolution is something that began around 1850 when we started transforming we started changing our relationship with nature, and there was a huge increase in industrial production, especially in the Western modern societies. So industrialization that began in 1850 with factories and new forms of transportation and a lot of deforestation. Deforestation of forests, contamination of waters, all of these factors have led to climate change. And so what is climate change? It has to do with all of these emissions that industries are putting out into the atmosphere, and they accumulate and they lead to a layer of greenhouse gases. And so all of the emissions of factories and cars and other kinds of emissions mean that there are gases that accumulate in the atmosphere, and that leads to climate change. There is now a layer of these gases, and this accumulation leads to climate change, which is changing the water cycles, increasing temperatures. It's heating the atmosphere. And I'm sure that we have already, all of us, felt the effects of some extreme event provoked by climate change. Sometimes it's a matter of a flood, sometimes it's a huge increase in temperature, sometimes it has to do with drought. And so climate change has to do with two things. One is the change in temperature, the rise in temperature, average annual temperature, and the alteration of the water cycle. As the temperature increases, you have more alteration of the water cycle. And there's two ways of dealing with climate change, of approaching it. We can talk about the causes and talk about who is responsible for climate change. We have talked about human activity, but there is a greater responsibility among different groups of humans because developed countries have really provoked this climate change. So when we talk about responsibilities of climate change, or responsibility for climate change, that's one thing, but some people like to talk about the rise in greenhouse gases without talking about who's responsible for it. And this is a central topic to the discussion at the COP. Now, the COP is the Conference of Parties, as you know. And there's two big blocks of negotiations. There's the developed countries, and there's countries in development. The developed countries are those who are responsible for the great majority of greenhouse gases because they're the ones who have industrialized the most. And so they are most directly responsible for the increase in temperatures. And their contamination and their emissions has changed through the greenhouse effect, has changed the climate for people all around the world. And then on the other hand, we have developing countries, countries who don't have a lot of industrial development, but they're experiencing the impact of climate change. So there's two ways of understanding climate change. One that doesn't look at responsibility and one that does. Now, science has clearly shown that human beings are responsible for climate change and that it comes from our industrialized societies and the development of capitalism, consumer societies, the market economies. These are the things that are causing climate change. And so that you are going to be talking about this at the COP, and you're going to be forming the position of Indigenous peoples in all of this. And Indigenous peoples, of course, have had nothing to do with the increase in global temperatures and climate change. Indigenous peoples have conserved their forest and their practices and their traditions and their respect for Mother Earth. However, now they are still suffering through the impacts of climate change. So this is the concept of climate justice. How do we understand climate change? We can understand it just technically, or we can understand the structural causes of climate change. So here's another element that's important to take into account, and that has to do also with historic responsibility. You can see in this slide that historic responsibility for climate change comes from different places. Here, you see the various colors you have for the Middle East and Africa with this color, and then Latin America and the Caribbean with a darker orange, Asia with green, economies in transition with the gold color, and the developed countries of the OECD are in the blue. And so the Industrial Revolution began around 1850. And you can see as time goes by that there's a lot more greenhouse gas emissions, and that the largest part of these emissions come from the developed OECD countries. We're talking about carbon dioxide, methane, and other greenhouse gases. And most of them are coming from the developed countries. And you can see also how the total amount of emissions have increased exponentially over the years. And so we can see here the historical responsibility over the years. And this isn't a political topic. And with the UN Framework Convention, the world has expressed its great concern about how climate change is affecting the earth and will affect the earth. So we have talked about common responsibilities, but differentiated historically. And what does that mean? It means that we all are living through the impacts of climate change. And so we all have a responsibility in the world. All of us have to contribute and to engage in climate action. However, there's differentiated historical responsibilities. Again, because the developed countries have greater responsibility for the emission of these gases. And so that when we talk about those things, we're talking about climate justice. And when we talk about responsibility currently for greenhouse gases, you can see that greenhouse gases are produced in the first place. The highest emitter is China, followed by the United States, followed by the European Union, the 28 countries. And together, along with India, they are emitting about 72.78% of greenhouse gases that are leading to climate change. Our countries, developing countries like Bolivia and Thailand and South Africa, they Indonesia. Now, Brazil is one of the higher developed countries now, but these other countries here in gray have lesser level of responsibility. They're producing less percentages of the greenhouse gases. This doesn't mean, as I said before, that we don't have responsibilities. We have global responsibility for it, but we do need to recognize who is emitting the highest level of greenhouse gases. And when we talk about the impacts of climate change, often, remember I said there's two things that define it. One has to do with temperature and the rising of temperature, and the other has to do with the alteration of the water cycle. Increasing temperatures, according to study, we can see that if we continue the same kind of industrial development and use of soil and use of non-renewable energy, fossil fuels, etc., if we continue on with these developmental practices, it's quite likely that the temperatures in the world will go up by 2 or 3 degrees, and that will be irreversible. In the case of the water cycles that's changing because of the rising temperatures, there are also severe impacts. So we're looking at the melting of the huge glaciers on the planet and the reduction of glacier surface means often that there is less water available in various areas, and small islands are impacted because the water level is rising, and it will no longer be possible to live on many of these islands. There are going to be some irreversible impacts of climate change. And often extreme drought is a result of climate change, and on the other hand, flooding. So there's a historic responsibility for climate change. However, the impacts are being experienced all over the world in the same way, without distinction of whether you're a developed country or a developing country, whether we are more or less responsible. But there's another thing that's important to be clear on to understand this idea of harms and losses. I'm going to talk with you about these three key concepts. They're three ideas that I'd like to position with you so that you could include them in your declaration as you write your document of Indigenous women when you're permitted to have some interaction in the negotiations for climate change. The first concept has to do with Indigenous resiliency. Indigenous resiliency is the ancestral and historic ways of life that we have in our territories, where we have coexisted with a culture that includes knowledge of plants, with ancestral knowledge about how to be in harmony with our environment, to not harm the environment. And therefore, Indigenous communities have not been responsible for climate change. And Indigenous cultures live in such a harmonic way with the ecosystem and with the earth that we have not been great contributors to climate change. So Indigenous resilience is something that we like to emphasize when we talk about the fact that we're not responsible for climate change, and that the Indigenous way of life is one of harmony and respect for Mother Earth, and it's a paradigm that we can teach to society today, which should be generating new paradigms for lifestyles. And it points towards the structural causes of climate change, and it questions the development model that has led to climate change. The model that began at the time of the Industrial Revolution. So Indigenous resilience is the way that we understand how we should live on this earth. And it's a paradigm that can serve humanity, not just Indigenous communities, it can serve all of humanity. The way that we live and understand the world is something that can be of service to humanity. The other concept that I would like to make sure gets mentioned in this conversation is the concept of climate justice. And the climate justice begins with this chart that I showed you earlier, which is historic responsibility for climate change, that we have common responsibilities, but our contribution to climate change has been differentiated historically. So here you see who has the greatest responsibility for climate change, and therefore who needs to contribute more to mitigating the effects. Those who are not responsible for climate change, such as developing countries or Indigenous peoples, have the capacity to contribute to a climate change that is affecting all of us. So climate justice is a concept that helps us to understand the responsibility of the developed countries for climate change. And the next concept is the mechanism of harms and losses, but I would go back a little bit further to climate financing. All of the negotiation of climate change in the negotiations is concentrated on a central point, which is that the developed countries want to have a discourse that they're going to reduce the effects of climate change and greenhouse emissions without taking into consideration the impacts of climate change. However, the developing countries are focusing a lot more, and I'm going to change my slides here. Oh, well, I'll go back to this concept later. But definitely, in terms of climate justice, developing countries are saying those who have historic responsibility for climate change should contribute more to financing technology and capacity building to all of the sectors and actors and peoples like Indigenous peoples that need greater funding to be able to face these impacts of climate change. So one of the mechanisms in this area is called the harms and losses mechanism, which I'll talk about in a bit. So I want to leave these three concepts, these three major points, to talk about how to build a position and a document stating our position on climate change. So when we talk about climate justice, we're talking about the fact that the responsibility for the climate crisis is not equal. Some countries are more responsible than others for climate change. And once again, we're talking about developed countries. And climate justice has to do with the fact that the impacts of climate change are occurring to everyone. It doesn't matter where you live, what your sex is, what your age is, but the way that people can respond to the effects of climate change are different. And so people are feeling it with different intensity. So what does that mean? Those who have more resources have a greater ability to deal with the impacts of climate change. And there are so many other actors who don't have anything to be able to face the damages. And therefore, the effects are felt at different levels of intensity. The worst effects then of climate change are affecting people in lesser developed countries, the Pacific Islands, and it's also affecting Indigenous women and young people the most. And why are we talking about young people and women? Because there's a greater vulnerability among these groups. So we say that climate change is affecting young people and women with greater intensity. And so how do we deal with this? First of all, we have to have a recognition of historic responsibility. And we need to apply climate justice, and to do so, we need to have support and funding to face the impacts and to recover from the impacts and to prevent the impacts of climate change and the harms and losses caused by extreme weather events. And we'll talk about this a little bit more, and we'll talk a little bit more about what this thing of harms and losses means. All of this has to do with applying climate change justice and quantifying the responsibility for the damage caused by climate justice, which also leads to the provocation and violation of human rights. It's an intergenerational problem and an intersectional issue. So I want to make sure I respect the time here. Go ahead, Elvira. So when we talk about harms and damages, we have to talk about extreme weather events. The impact of climate change in the short, medium, and long term are different. But in these last few decades, we're already seeing the evidence of extreme weather events caused by climate change, and they're provoking true disasters that are affecting the territories, ways of life, and well-being of Indigenous peoples all over the world. So we call this harms and losses. These are the losses that are caused by extreme weather events. For example, when there's extreme rainfall, there's destruction of infrastructure, the rivers grow, destroying things in its path. And you can see the after effects of the flooding here. And so all of this is harms and losses. So these are immediate catastrophic impacts being caused by climate change, and they need immediate attention. We need a way to respond rapidly to assure human life. And so that's part of what we're talking about here. In terms of harms and losses, there are intergenerational and intersectional elements here, because there's an impact on children, because we are putting their future at risk. And many children have to stop going to school because their schools have been destroyed, or because there's climate chaos. And women are working doubly and triply hard to make sure their families have enough food to eat. So these are some of the extremes that we're seeing. When we talk about the mechanisms for harms and losses, this is something that people have been talking about in the UN Framework Convention. But the developed countries have tried to avoid this discussion focused on climate justice. But the tendencies are so clear now that it's harder to hide. Nicaragua has been very strong in talking about the harms and damages at the Conference of Parties, especially in the indigenous territories in Nicaragua. We've been talking about these issues since the 13th Conference of Parties in 2007. And there's been a conversation about how to compensate for these harms and losses. Very long and tedious conversations. That's why it's important to have specialized people to accompany these processes, because it's very frustrating to get to a Conference of Parties meeting and see that things are moving so slowly, and that we're moving so slowly towards the objective of structural solutions to the problem of climate change. The interests of wealthier countries and wealthier corporations are those that are predominating in these meetings still. In terms of the mechanisms of harms and losses, however, finally, in COP19 in 2013, there was an acceptance of the need to have an international mechanism a Warsaw International Mechanism, and they have an executive committee. And finally, the mechanism is created, and there's a recognition that there must be an economic fund created to be able to attend to all of these damages and losses that have been caused.
So this is not just for the adaptation, but also for a long-term effect. We want a mechanism for harms and losses that works towards recovering and to help these communities that are affected immediately. There's a new mechanism that is very positive that Indigenous peoples in the negotiations have presented this, and that is that this financing mechanism about harms and losses needs to come to them directly. And Indigenous peoples have advocated strongly that this financing must reach directly the territories and the population, the Indigenous population, because the ability to respond and to organize is here. It is not anywhere else. If it comes through red tape, through bureaucracy, through the governments, through the ministries, and then the resources don't get to us the same way. So this mechanism for financing for harms and losses that has been approved, it has been created, but it's not defined, well defined yet. There is a working group that now has to discuss, and we need to see how it needs to be administered, this loss and damage mechanism. So it is a very strong process that Indigenous peoples have to follow to demand that this loss and damage mechanism, that financing comes directly to the Indigenous people's territories. This is the decision from last year by the COP, and it says that the agreements, that the Conference of the Parties, that is the gathering of all the country, that's where all the governments go, only the governments, the civil society cannot be there, but there's working, campaigning on the outside to advocate on the decisions by the governments. But in the structure of the Framework Convention of the UN, those who make the decision are the governments. And the decision last year at the COP 27 said this: the Conference of the Parties recognize the urgent and immediate need for new, additional, predictable, and adequate financial resources to assist developing countries that are particularly vulnerable to the adverse effects of climate change, to respond to economic and non-economic loss and damage associated with the adverse effects of climate change, including extreme weather events and slow onset events, especially in the context of ongoing and ex post measures, including rehabilitation, recovery, and reconstruction from these impacts. It also decides to establish new financing arrangements to assist developing countries that are particularly vulnerable to the adverse effects of climate change to respond to loss and damage, including by focusing on addressing loss and damage by providing and helping to mobilize new and additional resources, and that these new arrangements complement and include sources, funds, processes, and initiatives within and beyond the Convention and the Paris Agreement. They also decide, in the context of the establishment of the new financing arrangements referred to above, establish a loss and damage response fund whose mandate includes an approach to addressing loss and damage. And here's what I was saying before: the creation of this mechanism for financing loss and damage that should focus on the response to extreme events from climate change, and the advocacy process that we still have to do at the COP negotiation is how this is going to be done. Are these funds going to come only through the effort by the countries, or are they going to be committed to civil societies, to Indigenous peoples? Elvira, I apologize, but we only have 3 minutes left. Okay, thanks. With this, I think that I will conclude this section, because what we have now, and what I would like to conclude with, though, because you know that we've talked about these three ideas, the strengths, as suggestions to build a positioning document for the negotiations at the COP. We've talked about climate justice. That's clear that countries have to recognize their responsibilities in terms of climate change, and therefore they have to generate more financing for climate and financing for loss and damage and damages that has to go towards the recovery from these extreme events. But they also, this financing, climate financing has to strengthen this indigenous resiliency, which is what's made possible that we can sustain our work. And when we talk about indigenous resiliency, we're talking about the ability by indigenous peoples who have overcome taking their lands and industrial development, nevertheless, the deforestation of their forests, but all of that process of destructuring the indigenous structures remain alive with their own cultures, with their own language, with their own processes. So we're talking about strengthening that ability, that historical, ancestral ability that we have that has to do with this multidimensional way of indigenous, for the management of indigenous territory. We talk about territorial resiliency, and I think our sisters from Kenya shared how we can improve the territory, how we organize our territory to prevent to organize and prevent those impacts, and to adapt through reforestation, changing our what we cultivate, and organizing for all of these events. We've also talked about our socio-cultural resiliency, that through our customs, our foods, our ancestral processes, we have been able to create great diversity, and women have women play an incredible role in knowing the plants, knowing the seeds, etc. We talk about political institutional resiliency, which is nothing but the respect to our ancestral authorities who are in our territories, because under their command, we can restructure, improve, and protect our territories. And lastly, the economic resiliency, which consists on strengthening from our cosmovision, with our practices, with our knowledge, in order to improve and transform our life conditions, to make sure that we have food sovereignty, that we can conserve our forests, that we can produce our food. So I will conclude with this. So I started with these three pillars and will conclude with them. And now I open the space to deliberate, to have a dialogue, to build this document where we can present our ideas in terms of climate justice, so that we can advocate from the local level, the regional, and the global. But from our territories, we need to fight with the governments and with the administration from the state, so that we can achieve the transformation of our territories at the local and regional levels. And we're going to build from that base the mechanisms through the loss and damage fund. So again, there's these three pillars: the climate justice, the financing, and the indigenous resiliency. Thank you so much, Nadia and sisters, for your patience listening to me. Thank you to you, Elvira, for clarifying all of these concepts, all of these key issues, which are aligned to the indigenous people's realities, and how to approach all of that and translate it to the Indigenous community's realities. That's a big job, and that's another challenge. And from FIMI, we drive a lot of that work to conceptualize from Indigenous women's perspectives, per se. So thank you so much for clarifying all of this. I think that that your presentation will complement really well the questions that Rabi presented at the beginning of the session. 2 or 3 comments or reflections for this part of the presentation by Elvira. Let's have that first. And then we will go back to Rabi. She can then take that space that she was moderating through the questions that she presented. But I don't know if first someone wants to have any comments to Elvira's presentation. Could be a comment, could be a question, anything that you would like her to clarify a little bit further. The mics are available to you. You can raise your hand or simply open your microphone and speak. Any concerns? Is everything clear? Anything you would like to know a little bit more about to complement the questions that Rabi presented at the beginning of our gathering? Okay, then if there are no comments at the moment, and since time is of the essence, let's continue, Rabi, with the session that we had initiated at the beginning with our questions. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nadia, and thank you very much, Elvira. It was a very enriching session regarding especially the different key thematic pillars that you identified that we can focus our advocacy on. So I think it's good Elvira's presentation even came before we come back to our discussion, because it has already given us like pillars already on which we can build our advocacy statement. So again, we come back, we share 3 questions to discuss again to see. So the mic is open. Anybody who wants to take the floor and share what are your reflections regarding the 3 questions, and we take it from there. We can start with the challenges and the issues in relation to climate change that we want the world to hear, taking into consideration everything Elvira has discussed regarding the adaptation, the impact, the rehabilitation, and mitigation strategies. So the floor is open, please. Can you share your reflections? Yes, Alika Tierra. Now the floor.
Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Alika Santiago from Mexico. It's a pleasure to be here with you and to share the floor reflecting on all of these issues that are so important for all of us and for our peoples. So I would like to share as a difficult challenge that we are living here in Mexico, in our region in the south. But I think this is happening everywhere in our regions all over the world, really. And that has to do with the appropriation, usurpation of our territories from our peoples, precisely to implement projects that contradict and harm our Mother Earth's life. These projects vary. In our case, we have ever more industry growing with extensive cultures. We have aeolic fields, photovoltaic fields. They're building a train that is fragmenting the entire sub-southern region in Mexico. And these projects are having a deep impact in the life of the earth, at their organization, our culture, our spirituality, our economy, all of pertaining to Indigenous peoples. And I believe that it would be very important to mention here that when we are deprived of our land to implement these projects that are sustainable, that impinge directly on our land, and we're the ones who receive the impact when the land, the water, the air is contaminated. And these initiatives or projects that follow a logic, a paradigm of development, as Elvira presented. And so I believe that it would be very important to take action with political aim from the states to try to aspire to a different paradigm. And in that sense, I think our peoples have all the baggage, because we are the ones who have protected our Earth's life, who maintained the balance. And even right now, at this moment in humanity, where there's a great disconnection with our Mother Earth because of the way of thinking that has now even come to our peoples, to our places. I think that teaching our practices, our cosmovisions, can guide all of us to go back or try to undo the damage done. Thank you.
Very much, Elvira. I will just raise a very important issue that we know it's cross-cutting amongst all indigenous communities. So the issue of land and resource rights. So this is a very important thing that we are taking up to see how it also, and we will figure out how we can integrate it. So any other person who wants to share their insights and perspectives? The floor is open, please. Maybe I will call on someone randomly, and let's just share, because we will also like to get perspectives from Africa as well. I see we have Alma Grace in the room.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. Greetings from India. Thank you so much for the sharing and enriching us with the updated knowledge on climate change and indigenous people and the communities. I was just reflecting, currently I'm based in my community, and I was trying to reflect what is happening in my community, and one of the very burning issue or the challenges which I see here is the change in agriculture system and the indigenous food system. I myself have been very much interested in promoting and practicing the indigenous agriculture system and food practices, but I see that in my community we no more find the traditional seeds, and the government schemes which are meant for to address the climate change related issues, they have many schemes for the indigenous people in my community, but I see that they provide the non-indigenous friendly seeds and the pesticides, and they do not promote the indigenous agriculture system, the seeds, and also the indigenous knowledge, which have been already in the verge of extinction, but they are not focusing on reviving or promoting those knowledges. So for me, at the community level, what the government should do is to work on the bottom to top approach, and they should also document the knowledges, the traditional knowledges that the community holds, and particularly women, which helps to mitigate the climate change effects. And at the policy level also, I think these issues should be included. And I also see that the funds which are meant to address the climate change issues are not directly provided to the organizations of the communities which are managed by the indigenous community. We are the benefactors, but we are not able to receive the fund directly and the way the community should utilize as per their knowledge and the need. So this is the just reflection I had now. So I think that's all. I will share a few more comments, a few more reflections later, maybe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Grace. You are raising a very important issue, which I think is kind of, it goes back to link with what Ira just mentioned regarding indigenous resiliency, which has different aspects, especially in the cultural and social resiliency aspect. So it is an important point that we have taken note of. And also you came back to the issue of financing, which was, talked about, which means our position as indigenous women is that we do have the capacity to run our issues and our programs and our projects, and so we also have the capacity to manage the finances. So we actually need it to come directly to the benefactors and not going through all the different bureaucratic processes and not reaching the real beneficiaries in the field. Thank you very much, Grace, so for sharing your reflections. Any other person? I will call on Carmen Gomez. I am just doing like a lottery now just to hear the different perspectives. So Carmen Gomez, you have the floor.
Carmen Gomez is one of the interpreters.
Oh, okay, sorry. Okay.
No problem,
So
thank you.
we have Deborah from Manipur. Deborah, are you here?
Yes, I can hear, but I don't have much to say. I'll just listen.
Okay, thank you, Deborah. You're welcome. It's all a learning process, so we are here to learn also. So I would call on Edna Kiplagat. If you're here, please, we would want to hear your what you think about the discussions and what are the priorities that we should put on the table in the dialogue. Edna? We have Edna? Okay, maybe, yeah. So I will also use the opportunity to call on Jamie if she has any other thing to share. Jamie, you have the floor. We
Thank you,
would like to
sister.
hear your perspective.
Am I audible now?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, sister. Firstly, I want to thank you for arranging this insightful session. So I have heard many of the sisters have shared their issues about climate change and regarding the COP28. So if I want to mention about my context. So I'm from Bangladesh and Chittagong Hill Tracts. So I belong to Tanchanga community. And in our Chittagong Hill Tracts, we are 14 indigenous communities. So in the first question, if I want to answer about the first question, that what are the issues and challenges we face in relation to the climate change we want to all to hear and take note of. So in our context, the trend is the monoculture. No, the one kind of singular pattern of the trees are planting the in our indigenous people. Like there is only mangoes, mangoes, orchard, and this kind of monoculture is happening. So for that, the diversity of the diversity and the business and the capitalist mentality is what to say, in the mindset of the capitalism and the business, this kind of mentality is incorporating with the indigenous people. That's why people are tend to promote the monoculture. So, and this is for this region, the diversity of the forest, diversity of the our indigenous people's culture are affecting this way. And the another one is the climate the effect of the climate change is vast. No, the in the time of the water source are drying out, and the women who are collecting, who are the main collector of the water, they goes they in our this is situated in the Bandaban. They are basically in the superior of the people are basically the Mro people and the Chakma community people. So they basically went in the morning, very early morning, 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. for collecting the water, and there are the hours to collect the water. So their working hour and the distance between the road and for collecting this water, they are also facing different kinds of violence, as they have to collect from the far away from their home and the region. So these are the issues in our localities. And the second one is that as indigenous women, what should be our criteria we should focus on during COP. So I guess we should and I don't know, maybe you some of the you people know about the 5-star hotel construction in the Chimbuk area in our Chittagong Hills that are affecting most of the Mro people, almost 14 villages of the Mro people. So for this kind of construction, these are highly affecting the climate change and the people and especially the women's life. So I think we should focus on the free prior informed consent. This should be the focusing area. And for the working the third one. Oh, okay, well, so in the policy changes and what for the advocacy level, we should engage not only international and national stakeholder. I think we should also the local level organization, as they know better, far more better than the national level stakeholder and also the international stakeholder. So I think the approach and advocacy strategy should be more collaborative. So this way, this can be inclusive and also what to say, also intensive and inclusive. So that's all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jamie. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, you are very right, and I think this space that we are discussing is part of the collaboration and inclusive strategy that is in place to be able to have, the different insights from the local organization, national, and even regional, so that when we, speak, we can speak as one voice and we can reflect the indigenous realities around the globe in the world. So thank you very much. It's our pleasure. So I will also want to call on the Nepal Indigenous Women's Forum. I can see they are in the hall so that we can get the perspective of our regional networks. Kalpana Bhattacharya. Sorry if I didn't pronounce your name very well. So you have the floor. Please, we would like to hear your own perspectives and what are the priorities in addition to everything that has been discussed? What priorities do you want us to put for our advocacy? Ms. Kalpana, yeah. Okay. So what about Sandia Damodi? Wow. Sandia? Okay. So maybe our sisters have some connection problems. I don't know. But so the floor is still open. I will give a chance like 3 minutes to one or two persons again to like share their perspective that you would want to see on the table before we conclude the session. Anyone from Africa who would like to take the floor, or from Latin America? We have heard from Asia, so we would like to hear from Latin America. It will be great, this diverse regional perspective. From Nadia.
Hello,
Hello.
my name is
You
Nadia
have the floor.
Painefil, and I'm part of an association here. It's called the Guyanunca Environmental Association. We work on reforestation with native species through community greenhouses. So what we would like to do is to reforest the water basin there around the lake where we live, and to strengthen the whole region in that way, because here in the region there's a lot of planting of exotic trees like eucalyptus, but we're seeing water dry up, and so this is a problem for the next generations. We also have a problem with agriculture because they're using a lot of agrochemicals, which are contaminating the lake because there is an excessive use of agrochemicals. And so the lake is not getting enough oxygen. And that's going to be a problem for the future as well. But the primary problem right now has to do with the forestation and the wrong species that have been planted on the region, and it's affecting the Mapuche people's way of life.
Hello, Nadia. Are you there, Nadia?
Nadia, usted.
Okay, it seems like we lost Nadia. So anyway, thank you, Nadia. I think everything is like somehow interrelated because you mentioned the issue of exotic trees and the use of agricultural pesticides and all of this that affect. So it all weaves in back into the territorial resiliency that we were talking about, indigenous resiliency that we were talking about previously. So we need to also focus on restoring our traditional indigenous knowledge on the kind of trees that are very friendly to the nature, to the water, and also the use of maybe very ecological manures that were used by our forefathers. So it is still coming back to weave into the bigger picture of what was discussed previously. So I have the floor for one person. Again, we would like to hear at least maybe someone from Africa also, or any other person who wants to take the floor before we conclude this session. Any other person? Yeah. Okay. 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 Please just go ahead, and anybody who has something to say, go ahead and open your mic. You have the floor. So.
Go ahead. I think the Juana Lopez from the Chorotega people is asking for the floor. The Chorotega people from Totogalpa.
Is the sister, is she here?
Harold from Nicaragua says, has posted something. Would you like to take the floor? The space is open. Hello, good morning. Yes,
Good
go ahead.
morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Greetings from Honduras. What we're doing here has to do with the fact that our health has been so affected. We've had very abrupt climate changes, and that has led to many illnesses and even to a problem with availability of food goods for subsistence. The seasons in which we harvest our basic goods have changed now because the rains have changed, and we need more technology now because we can't depend on the rain as we have always been able to historically. We're also seeing that there's been a lack of planning from the public administrations. This topic hasn't been taken on with enough importance, and there's a lot of denialism still. And some of the things and the laws that have been passed are not being enforced. There have been signed agreements, for example, but they are not getting the attention that they deserve. And so we're making some efforts, but our efforts are small. They're not going to be able to change this whole situation, but it does allow us to raise our awareness. And our resilience is being tried because community coexistence is also being threatened. We're seeing that we have more conflicts over water, over potable water systems, and it's worrisome because the water flow in the area has really diminished, and that's the water that feeds all of our production systems. In FEMI, FEMI is supporting us to plan more resilience and to implement a resiliency plan for climate change. And all of this is strengthening us to increase our skills and to identify different ways of facing this situation. The challenges and the impacts are great, and they happen in a number of different dimensions and levels. But we are grateful for all of the efforts being made to strengthen our communities, and I hope that we will be able to take more and more organized action on these issues. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you very much, Laura. Thank you. We appreciate, and we have taken note also, again, coming back to the issue of indigenous people's resiliency, strengthening our collective resilience, protecting our lands, and so on. So I think if there is no other person who wants to share any view, I just want to appreciate everyone. I think we have gone around the global issues, and we have identified different priority focuses ranging from finance and resource allocation We have discussed lengthily even with Elvira, and then we have talked about the issue of gender justice and inclusion and meaningful participation of Indigenous women in these spaces, and also in the different experiences shared by the different participants, we have seen the issue of land and resource rights actually coming up. So that has been taken note that it is a clear priority, because without our lands, without our resources, we cannot actually execute any sustainable development. And also the issue of recognizing the role of Indigenous women, particularly, and Indigenous people generally as key stakeholders in decision-making processes. So I would like to thank you, and we are going to compile all of the different points that we have discussed and compile it into one draft statement, and we are going to share with all of you, our sisters, maybe to review and input again before we would have the final draft. So thank you very much once again. I will give back the floor to the general moderator, my colleague, Nadia. You have the floor.
Thank you, Ravi. Just wanted to confirm that there is a final message. I don't know if someone would like to read Jamie's message.
Yes.
And I hate to be able to close without hearing from our brothers and sisters from Nicaragua. I think they're having trouble with their audio. If you could write in the chat, please, what you were wanting to transmit to us, that way we can at least read it. Ravi, can you read what the people said in the chat so that we can share those words?
Yeah, sure. So I can see a message from Jamie. She says, as issues I want to mention about stone collection and deforestation, monoplantation, establishing brick field and unplanned construction, and also the forced settlement of Bengali people in indigenous peoples areas are the main issues they are facing. Yeah, so as Bengali people's point of view and indigenous people's relation with nature are totally different. So this is what Jamie is sharing with us. And also we have different perspectives from Maya Shah, who is also sharing regarding challenges, including the threat to livelihood of indigenous people, threat to traditional knowledge, and also under priorities, she is saying we can consider adaptation for livelihood and mitigation using traditional knowledge and innovation as a priority, and also the non-economic aspect of loss and damage to indigenous people should be highlighted. And in terms of policies that they would want us to advocate for, she's mentioning about the need to advocate for culturally appropriate and inclusive policies, including funding for indigenous people and women should be managed by the indigenous people themselves. And land rights is at the core of all the issues again. And indigenous people need to have their land rights so that they can protect themselves from the impacts of climate change, as well as adapt to the changes using their traditional knowledge. So yeah, I think it is still coming back to the issue of land and resources, livelihoods, and so on. So yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you, Rabi. I think we're continuing to have audio problems in Nicaragua for Harold. So as Rabi was saying, we will be drafting a document with what you have shared today. And I want to mention here that we're also have some notes from Elvira. And we do need to close soon, but we want to talk about legal security for territory, which is a need for our struggle against climate change, and the need to recover our indigenous agriculture systems, starting with protecting our seeds and our healthy practices. We've also talked about the need to build public policies that incorporate indigenous knowledge and that support these knowledges. We've talked about funding, the need for funding and direct access to the funding by indigenous peoples. So I think a lot of the key messages are going to be along those lines. So we will close then, and I want to give you great thanks for your time and your patience and for this wonderful space of joint collaboration. And when we have the draft of our notes from this meeting, we will send it to you so that you can have a look at that. We are also planning to have a webinar and a workshop after COP to share a bit about the discussions that have happened, what kinds of agreements, what progress has been made or not made, and what are some of the challenges that remain. But that will be after, probably in January. So we hope to be able to count on your participation once again as a way of following up on what we've talked about today. Elvira, you have your hand up. Did you want to say something? Yes, thank you. I just wanted everyone to turn on their camera so we can have a group photo. Is that possible? Yes, that would be great. Thank you, Elvira. Go ahead and turn on your camera so that so the communications team can do a screenshot and get everyone's pictures. Everyone ready? I think we got it. Okay. Well, thank you to all of you for your wonderful reflections and words. We will continue to be in communication. Thank you to everyone.